Thank you for inviting me to speak here at the conference. And I'd like to build upon the themes that have been talked about at the conference in terms of service quality, customer experience, reliability of services, and things like that. Also noteworthy, there was some questions on security yesterday. So I'd like to give you my perspective on what I see out in the field, what's happening in terms of technology, standards, build upon what we do a lot of product assessments and operator assessments to determine what are the risks. So I'm going to talk about the threats, the vulnerabilities, some of the solutions that are out there today. The bottom line is the risks are increasing as we roll out all these great services with convergence. The different business models obviously create new types of risks that we have to address. As we have indicated in all the presentations, there's a dramatic change happening in terms of the players in the industry, the services, the applications, the end devices, whether it's the smartphone, a tablet, set-top boxes, whatever. Dramatic change in terms of content, the protection of content, information flowing across networks. All of these things have risks that we have to manage appropriately. But the same thing we also have to indicate is the threats are been changing over time. There's been a gradual progression in terms of sophistication, the impact, and things like that. And I'd like to take note of the ones that have been happening recently on the upper right-hand corner of the slide, where we have things called advanced persistent threats, where we have things like email that have attachments that are malicious, customized email in terms of emails that appear to be coming from your boss or your business partners or whatever, and the ability to then compromise the end device. We also have had supply chain. Supply chain has gotten more visibility in terms of some of the disruptions in supply chain that we have seen through natural disasters, but we've also seen it in the security area, where we have seen the advent or the introduction of counterfeit network equipment. You know, equipment that appears to be a certain brand, but maybe it isn't. So we have things like that, where now the supply chain, in terms of the products that we are buying personally or as an operator, you know, and what risks have we just assumed. We also have the things like botnets, which are massive number of compromised machines that are able to generate tremendous amount of traffic. Okay, we've heard the term denial of service or a flooding attack. You know, now we can see attacks that are in the gigabit range, multi-gigabit range. Okay, something that could be hitting your outer edge router. How do you deal with those kind of attacks? We had something called Rsa Compromise. You know, RSA produces security tokens that a lot of people use that are stronger than, you know, password type access control for remote access, etc. But the important thing here is now a major supplier has been compromised, and that technology obviously has been deployed in many places. What do? Do you replace all your tokens, all your security technology? Do you go to another vendor? How do you deal with that kind of an attack on a major supplier that is part of your infrastructure? And obviously in the mobile area, you know, with all the different types of applications that can be downloaded and used, and, you know, dramatically increasing every day. Some studies that have been indicated have shown that 70 to 80% of those apps are doing things that are not advertised, that the user is not aware of. Could be taking your contact list and shipping it somewhere. For an advertiser, could be doing something malicious. So the whole explosion in terms of mobile devices, and trying to access the infrastructure and services and things like that, you know, how do we deal with devices that we don't control? mobile device management is a very key area today. It has a lot of risks and security implications. And that's the struggle today, whether we're an enterprise, an operator, a content provider, or whatever. How do we deal with that? Because, the consumer now is very aware of things like privacy and data theft. Even in the region here, we've had over 70% of people surveyed have experienced data theft. So it's not, it's a global problem. And when we start talking about consumer experience, that's part of it. They read about viruses, they read about privacy violations, which can affect your brand. We also see interdependency, okay? We don't just stand by ourselves in terms of telecom or communications. There is a lot of critical sectors in an economy. Communications, obviously, is one of the underpinnings for banking, transportation, et cetera, okay, which transfers into physical assets. We have all different kinds of cabling and fiber to the home, optical devices, chemical plants, et cetera, which translate into all different types of cyber assets, okay, that could become targets, whether it's an end device, a core device, or whatever. And you see on the left there, statistically, there's a number of surveys out there that you can look at, but it's been standing pretty regularly in terms of the amount of external sources attacking your network from the outside. Now an outsider in today's world is a lot different than it used to be. It used to be, well, he's not an employee, but now we have many types of external sources as well as insiders. We have contractors, business partners, suppliers, et cetera, okay? So, those numbers over on the left here, pretty dramatic increases that we have seen, from 2% to 10% growing. We also see, how are these breaches occurring? We have, unintentional errors in terms of configurations. How do we configure a firewall, a router, an access list, whatever? But we also have, increases over the last year or two in terms of actual hacking, people compromising network devices as well as edge devices. We also have insiders in terms of privilege abuse and things like that. We do a lot of assessments, as I said, in terms of products, and I'll just give you some data points. We do a lot of, for the last 6 years, we've been doing product assessments in IPTV, set-top boxes, multimedia players, et cetera. We also have been assessing operator environments, whether it's the circuit switched, as well it evolves to the IP-based types of networks, wireless, 3G, 4G, as well as the evolution in terms of the internet types of ISP environments. What do we see from all these different types of assessments? This is trying to capture it here. And obviously the important thing here is it's not just a technology problem. It is an organizational problem, roles and responsibilities. We talk about convergence, from the traditional telecom to the IT, to the internet type of space, okay, different cultures coming together who have different views of security, privacy, resiliency that need to be dealt with. We also, when we log in, when we get on the internet, when we have to, put in our authentication, the security performance is important. We don't want the access server to be down, so network resiliency. As I said, the denial of service types of attacks. We know that will never be 100% secure, okay, because we're constantly evolving. So we need to have infrastructures that are resilient. It's not like, okay, if I get hit with this type of attack, my network goes down, okay. We've scanned products and we just ping a device and maybe scan the various ports and it keels over, a call manager or whatever. That's poor engineering. We also have to look at the different types of traffic that we have in our network, signaling, media, et cetera, that need to be secure. And how do we now start taking network management that we have talked about in terms of the OSS environment, from the element up to the network to the business, how do we now start integrating across and include security? into that model. So, you know, security metrics, as well as fault management and things like that we talk about in management. We also obviously all get caught up into the latest types of attacks, as I indicated a minute ago, but we also have to recognize that there have been vulnerabilities, default accounts in products, something called buffer overflow. Buffer overflow was discovered 40 years ago, and we're still talking about it today in web applications. Okay, so obviously we're very heavily into web-based services. Why do we still see buffer overflow as, you know, it's a poor programming practice? And, you know, and there's plenty of books, plenty of training in the area, but we still see it. We also now are trying to deal with new protocols, obviously, coming out, as well as the transport environment. You know, in our model, we always think about, in terms of IP, layer 3, layer 4 in the protocol stack, and our application security. Transport, we have to worry about layer 0, okay, so when we start talking about security architecture. And as I said, we have new types of issues to deal with, like supply chain. All that adds up to how are we dealing with the risks related to service quality. This is kind of a high-level picture in terms of the different types of threats cutting across right from the edge device into the core and the interconnection to our traditional public switch network, as well as cutting across the design life cycle, as well as the operations and physical facilities types of threats that we have to deal with. So it's a multidimensional issue that we're talking about. Also in the mobile environment, you know, we have a lot of different types of coexistence. You know, 2G, 3G. In one of the panels yesterday, they talked about when will we be shutting off our 2G network? Okay, so we have a lot of coexistence that's going to be around for a while. We also obviously have circuit switched. Okay, all writing in terms of IP types of services. One of the relevant things here is every technology and generation of technology has a particular security profile. Okay, and we see this, you know, in terms of some of the well-known hacker conferences, they recognize this. As you use your mobile phone and as you roam, you may be on a 2G network and maybe migrate to a 3G, maybe back to a 2G, whatever technology. Each one has a particular security profile, vulnerabilities. They recognize that, and they're waiting, okay, with equipment that can only cost maybe a few $100s, okay, to be able to compromise that air interface and the security sessions that are going over it. Okay, so, you know, this is a known thing to the hacker community. We also have in the middle there fragmentation. You know, we talk about the customer experience. Well, part of that is what do I have to do as a consumer in terms of accessing a service? Oh, maybe one service I got to use a PIN. Oh, another one I got to use a token. Another one I got to use password. You know, there's the plethora of things that we're demanding from a customer to access things. And obviously, you know, what happens? People write things down because I can't remember all the different types of codes I need to have to access the different types of services. Okay, so obviously that then becomes a risk of vulnerability. So we need now start looking through what is the customer experience in terms of how they access, how do I authenticate, how do I control access, how do I do fraud management in this new world as network and usage patterns change? How do I do the right data analytics, okay, to recognize what's normal and abnormal? Okay, it's changing in terms of this multimedia types of services, whether it's data and video or voice, whatever. Okay, we need to start, you know, rethinking that and start putting the appropriate technology, processes in place to be able to deal with this mixed world that we're going to live in for quite a while. Now, you know, we can all capture, there's many technical trends, you know, some of them I've been listing here, but they all have to be brought out and looked at is what is sufficient security in terms of my infrastructure, whether I'm an enterprise, whether I'm a home user, whether I'm an operator, okay? And how does this cut across and what's the interdependencies that for example, the hardware, software components that are in your smartphone or your set-top box or whatever, how does that play into this whole security profile? There's also many operational trends. Obviously, here at the conference, we're talking about all different types of models, business models, MVNOs, managed services, different types of network operations centers. How do we deal with multiple suppliers? How do we do supply chain? How do we do risk mitigation across those different suppliers? We have many different types of system configurations and service configurations, and they all may have different types of profile. Robustness testing has become very common in the industry. There's a lot of tools out there that will say, okay, let me issue a lot of bad traffic at this new device and see how it reacts. Well, that's great. I mean, it's good type of testing, but it's not sufficient in terms of what we're talking about. We also know that there's all different types of configurations. There's many types of errors that can be created as we grow and change our network, as our networks get more interfaces and expand. We have a lot of issues in terms of switch and firewall. We have many firewall rules, and we have the human trying to, add in different types of configurations, open up new types of ports or whatever. And we also recognize that those configuration and misconfigurations, and studies have indicated that there can be many different types of errors in devices. Could be 3, 4 misconfigurations in a device that are critical. If you don't catch them, your IP network is vulnerable. And we've done studies across all different kinds of industries, and not just telecom, but enterprises and things like that across the world. Now how do you do policy management? Okay, we talk about that. We can write nice documents that talk about policy, but how do we do configuration management from a security perspective, quality of service, and really not just look at it in terms of as a static environment, but also something that can be looking at what's actually deployed out there, taking the configurations and routers and switches and things like that. But the end result can be issues, can be not just can affect reliability, could be a security issue, it could be a non-compliance from a regulatory perspective. Could be also how do I configure the quality of service of a network to support things like voice over IP. Now, as we step back from all of this data and threat and vulnerability information, we also have to recognize that there's all different kinds of dimensions to the problem. Obviously, we all want to be down in the world-class network and services, and how do we deal with that? But as we look across all the different kinds of networks and the interconnection, we have to understand that there's a transformation going on, okay? And in each of those areas, there can be all different kinds of threats and different types of vulnerabilities. Now, I just took some snippets here to give some examples. Voice over IP we've talked about, and obviously is a common service and technology. It could be on an enterprise level, it could be public service type of level, but different types of security threats just for one particular service. One thing that we have talked about and I mentioned before is security testing. Okay, we all test at some level in terms of labs before we put it into the production environment, or we do product testing at a supplier location or whatever. And there's a term in security called penetration testing, and that's been around for a long time, and there's toolkits that people use. Well, what we're seeing and what the market is demanding is it's not sufficient anymore. The threat has changed not from just software, but also the hardware level. If I use encryption, for example, and I use encryption keys, where do I store the encryption keys? Okay, I don't care about what the quality of the encryption is. If I got the keys, it doesn't really matter. Okay, we're also having to cut across multiple protocol layers. Okay, right from the hardware all the way up to the application layer. All different kinds of protocols, applications, infrastructure, routing, things happening that we have to figure out, what is really happening here. As I said, we do a lot of testing of IPTV products from suppliers around the world, and I deal with a lot of the content supply entities like movie studios and sports programming and things like that. And what I've seen in terms of an evolution, what I did 6 years ago was, okay, I may do a brief scan of a set-top box interfaces to what they're demanding I do today. Okay, the content providers are saying, I don't want what happened to the music industry happen to me. I want to protect my content in a very big way. I understand the threat. The set-top box could be in someone's home, residence, a hotel room, whatever. Okay, the multimedia player, it's the same thing. So now I am now testing at a hardware, middleware, software layer, communication protocol level, okay? And when the results get back to the content provider from the supplier, okay, they say fix it all before my content can go through it. So, the whole thing of testing has dramatically changed and how content is protected. We talk about 4G LTE. And in 3GPP, the standards body, they've been defining the LTE security architecture, okay? Well, one of the issues that we contend with in standards is options. Is it mandatory or is it optional? Okay, what do they see the risks in terms of the user device, air interface, or the core, or, what do they see in terms of what type of technology is adequate for that? We are seeing that, people take options. Well, that means, I don't have to do it. Okay, so, as we evolve the mobile technology, we really need to recognize what types of security is being provided, confidentiality, integrity, things like that. And what is the technology, security technology, in this case IPsec is like a secure tunneling protocol, what types of operational requirements is that placing on the operator, for example? Or if I plug into an LTE network, what do I assume from a security perspective as a customer? So obviously we can't be 100%, as I said, it's a risk management problem. We have to assess where we are, we have to implement the appropriate controls, and we have to measure from a metric standpoint, what's happening in our network in terms of different types of attacks, fraud, things like that. We've talked about service excellence many times. I'm taking kind of a little different perspective here, in terms of, we talk about major attributes like customer care and billing and, quality, service quality. There's a parallel here in terms of, okay, if I'm doing billing, my customers are assuming I'm doing some kind of level of fraud management, okay? If I have a problem, data theft, when I call, will I have some ability to get some support in terms of incident response? Am I doing the appropriate level of intrusion detection and prevention? The app store that I may have, am I doing anything in terms of understanding the quality of those apps that people are downloading? And maybe one of the most important things is brand. Okay, there's been many a company that has been burned because they get bad press to say, oh, privacy violations, customer information was downloaded from my unprotected server. That's not too good, okay? Privacy is an important aspect that the common user, person on the street understands. And how do we relate to that? Obviously, we've said it's not just a technology problem, it's a people, facility, operations, etc., that we have to now embrace in terms of how do we assess where we are and provide the appropriate protections across the different types of facilities and planes that we have. The important thing is when we do assessments, we decompose the infrastructure into all different piece parts. I'm not going to go through them all, But again, it's important where I'm separating out content, like I talked about in the IPTV case, you know, from the different types of information, whether it's customer information, network management information, whatever, and the applications. How am I looking across all of that and assessing what types of risks there are? I throw up this because obviously there's many security standards and requirements, things, but I focus in on things that are related to telecom. Because one of the things I find when I go out, everybody's focused on IT security and things like ISO 27001 and 2 and things. And I say, that's great, you know, that's telling me your security policies are documented. Now, are they really implemented? Okay, and how do I break up the infrastructure to really understand the various dynamics? As we said, there's many piece parts that we have to create into an integrated program, and I'm not, again, I don't have time. But, you know, the key here is the provider, operator. Obviously, there's a regulatory body, policies that may be coming. Different countries are very active in that space. We have, as I said, different types of networks. There's many different networks that we're talking about. We're now talking about, you know, how does the customer interface to my environment? Supply chain, intrusion detection, personnel, etc. All these different things create a world-class security program that we need to have to deal with the threats that exist today. It's also a life cycle issue. Okay, we understand there's churn. There's new technology, new services always coming in. We're churn in terms of customers leaving, customers entering into the network. How do we deal with all that dynamics? You know, how do we focus in on, you know, assessing? How do we integrate security into the procurement process in terms of dealing with designing new services, vendor mitigation, things like that? How do we roll out new services? You know, some of the services we roll out, we talk about how wonderful they are. Never tell the customer, well, here are some of the risks that you really need to deal with, or I can help you deal with them. So obviously there's a business opportunity. And then how do we monitor on an ongoing basis? So in summary, security has always been kind of viewed as a cost center. Well, it's kind of like I got to do it. It's kind of like insurance and things like that. But what we have seen is now the paradigm has changed. Okay, now to enable some of the services, I got to put the appropriate security in place. Okay, the marketplace is now more sensitive to that. The consumer is more sensitive to that. We also see it as a differentiator. It is part of the service excellence, service quality that people are expecting. And how do you differentiate yourself between someone else, a competitor or whatever, whether you're a supplier, an operator, or whatever? We also have to recognize that there's going to be different business models that will create security. Threats and vulnerabilities will continue to evolve. It's relentless in terms of people attacking networks and malware and from all over the world. How resilient am I to an attack? Small attack, big attack, okay. Does my network crash? You know, what's the reaction? So, you know, there's a lot of disciplines that have to go together in terms of how you architect your networks. Some of the new architectures are, in some cases, more risky because there's integrated access. So I got single points of failure that somebody potentially could go after, and things like that. So, and again, it's end-to-end. It's not just, okay, you know, right out to the set-top box, PC player, smartphone, whatever it is, the end device, okay, all the way through into the network, access and core, all the way to the other end is something that has to be looked at, not just from a piece part mentality. Thank you. That's all my prepared remarks. I don't know if there's any questions.
Definitely one of the most critical point in the development in the future. A lot of reluctance to introduce particularly hybrid model with over-the-top, etc. I will come back to that later on. Any question from the audience, please? If not, you showed earlier in one of your slides the interaction with the set-top box, particularly the provision of streaming services on video on demand, etc. Now, several operators are following a hybrid model. Basically, you're getting the IP signal from different broadcasting technologies and IPTV, obviously. At the same time, opening the Pandora box for all kind of over-the-top services, right? So a lot of them are positioning themselves. We heard yesterday that Etisalat is one of the players who are doing that. So now when you start to have kind of an app store on your TV, where you have a mixture of your application, etc., where is the liability when it comes to hosting an application or a service from a third party? So who do you call in the call center when you have a problem, and how do you manage the liability and security on that? Can you eventually elaborate on certain examples?
I guess, you know, what we now start seeing is service level agreements and agreements need to start including security and the roles and responsibilities. You bring up a very good point, because roles and responsibility usually are very vague. Okay, it's who do you call, who's responsible, who's the, like I mentioned, incident response. You know, all that needs to be thought out when you start getting into this integrated with multiple players. Okay, and we're now seeing agreements that are being struck where it includes a security section. Okay, and not just the normal quality of service type of dimension to it. So we see more and more of people starting to think about that and starting to include that into the agreements, but it's kind of an evolving area. It's all over the map at the moment.